Russia's war against Ukraine has had two unintended consequences. It has strengthened both our organizations, the EU and NATO, and it has brought us closer together. First, we are stronger. NATO has reinforced its presence in Eastern Europe, and it will have two new members, Sweden and Finland. Putin wanted less NATO, but he has achieved the opposite. He will have more NATO, and he will have more EU. We are also getting stronger. We are speeding up the enlargement process with the Western Balkans, and we took the historic decision to grant candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova, and the European perspective to Georgia. And we are reinforcing our European defense. For the first time in history, we provided little military equipment to Ukraine through our European Peace Facility just a few hours after the start of the war. So far, we have reached more than 3 billion euros, in addition to the massive military contributions of our member states. Since day one, we have stood by the people of Ukraine with strong military, financial, diplomatic, and political support.
This is going to be my first video update, and this is a nighttime video update for Tuesday, early evening in Nicosia, Cyprus. Let's talk about what is going on in the world today. You just saw a video from a meeting between NATO and EU officials, Stoltenberg, Charles Michel, and Ursula von der Leyen. And they were basically signing something like the third NATO-EU cooperation agreement or something like that, which further integrates NATO into the European Union and the European Union into NATO. And Charles Michel, well, he's talking about how Putin's plans have failed. Putin's evil plans have failed to break up NATO, and now NATO is more united, more unified than ever before, stronger than ever before, and it is joining forces with the European Union to become even stronger. Anyway, that was the message from Charles Michel. And Stoltenberg actually, during his statements, he said that NATO member nations have run out of weapons. They've given up all their weapons, or most of their weapons, in their stockpiles to Ukraine, and this was a good thing. This is a good thing that they've given up all their weapons to Ukraine, because it shows how unified NATO has become. Anyway, the whole meeting was, all the statements after the meeting was just a bunch of coping, because the European Union and NATO, they're having to deal with the entire Donbass crumbling, Soledar, Bakhmut, Marinka, the situation in Donbass, specifically Solidar. At least today, Solidar looks really, really bad for the European Union and for NATO and for the Zelensky regime. And they're having a hard time spinning it. They're trying to figure out, how do we spin this? So what better way than to spin things in a positive light than to say that Putin has failed, and what he has done is he has actually made NATO stronger, made the EU stronger, and has brought together the EU and NATO. And more weapons to Ukraine is a good thing, according to NATO. Good for the military-industrial complex is what Stoltenberg really meant to say. And look, the European Union and NATO, they were merging into one anyway. This was inevitable. The EU was going to become NATO. NATO was going to become the EU. NATO is the military muscle of the European Union, and this was inevitable that NATO and the EU would be merging together. Interesting that Michel mentioned that NATO has achieved expansion as well, expanding in Finland, expanding in Sweden. Not so fast. You have to wait for what Erdogan is going to say. But he mentioned how Ukraine, Moldova, and even Georgia are on the path to entering the European Union. And when you enter the European Union, NATO is kind of next on the list. But anyway, what was I going to say? What was I saying? Yeah, Charles Michel was talking about how these countries, these have become candidate countries, and this is a good thing. This is a win for the European Union. Once again, Putin has failed because now the EU and NATO is expanding. Finland, Sweden, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Some serious coping going on. Because at this very moment, Solidar is in big trouble for the Ukraine military. There was a meeting yesterday among the Ukraine military command and Zelensky, and rumor has it that Zaluzhny, the overall commander of the Ukraine forces, he is insisting that the Ukraine military pull out of Solidar. He is saying that if the Ukraine military does not pull out of Solidar, then they face encirclement and eventual annihilation or surrender. And Zelensky, it looked like he was about to retreat from Solidar, but then he started to think things over, and he started to flip-flop. And right up to now, even though the situation is really catastrophic for the Ukraine military, Zelensky is still not pulling out of Solidar. He has not given the okay to pull out the Ukraine military from Solidar. Yesterday evening, he gave his video address that he gives, I think, every night, almost every night, he gives the video address. And Zelensky said this, and I quote, "The battle for Donbass continues. Thanks to the resilience of our soldiers there in Solidar, we have bought Ukraine extra time and extra strength." I think Zelensky and NATO and the European Union and the White House, I'm getting the feeling that the hunch that they haven't figured out how to frame the narrative of a Ukraine retreat just yet. And so Zelensky is trying to say that the Ukraine military in Solidar, by hanging on this long, they've bought Ukraine enough time and enough strength for something. What that something is, I don't know. Perhaps they're going to say some sort of counteroffensive or something like that. But you can see that between the statements from the meeting between Van der Crazy, Michel, and Stoltenberg, and Zelensky's statement yesterday evening, that the collective West, they still haven't quite figured out how do we explain what is happening in Solidar to everyone. How do we explain this? And you know the European Union is very worried that the domino effect of Solidar falling, then Bakhmut, Marinka, and just the whole entire Donbass front collapsing, they're very, very worried that that's going to shake the unity and the confidence of EU member states, because there are probably a lot of EU member state leaders, especially in the smaller countries, that don't have access to the information of what is really happening in Ukraine, that are probably just buying the narrative that Ursula and Stoltenberg are feeding them. And so they go along with the sanctions, the 9 sanctions packages, and the sending of weapons and all of these things, and money and loans to Ukraine, because they're probably under the impression that Zelensky is winning, and any day now he is going to be marching on Red Square, and the European Union is going to get their hands on Russia and all of its wealth and natural resources. And coming from a small country that's an EU member state, I have the feeling that the very high up political elite actually believe that narrative. And if you come to them tomorrow and say, you know what, Solidar, Bakhmut, Marinka, the entire Donbass has collapsed, EU economies are in shambles, and Putin is still in power, I think those 3 narratives together are going to shock the crap out of a lot of political elite in the European Union. And the EU is very worried about that. The last thing they want is to see their unified front start to express doubts outside of Orban and Hungary. They don't want any other country expressing doubts in Project Ukraine, because the entire Ukraine narrative to date from the collective West has been all about territorial gain. The entire narrative is pushing the Russians out of Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. That's the narrative that the collective West has been spinning. That's been the goal of the conflict, of the sending of weapons, of the sending of money, of the mercenaries going to Ukraine, of everything. The whole goal has been get the Russians out of Ukraine so we can return Ukraine to pre-1991 borders. Ben Hodges yesterday, the general, retired general, whatever, the EU general, Ben Hodges, said it yesterday, Crimea by August. So what do you do when you've based your entire war plan on gaining territory and it's moving in the opposite direction? And not only that, you've suffered a catastrophic loss of men, of personnel, of equipment, because you've doubled, tripled, quadrupled down in Solidar and Bakhmut when you should have retreated. They should have retreated months ago, and they would have saved all of those men and all of that equipment, which is what the Russian strategy is. If the Russians are in a tight bind, what they do is they move out. If they feel like the territory they're holding isn't serving its purpose, and strategically it puts their forces in some type of danger, they leave. And they don't sacrifice the men and the equipment, and they pull out of areas with minimal to zero loss in manpower and equipment, like you saw in Kherson or Kharkiv. They preserve their fighting force. The exact opposite of Ukraine and the NATO strategy for Ukraine. The NATO strategy for Ukraine has been gaining territory at any cost, so that you can have the narrative of the map flipping from red to blue. In other words, Ukraine is gaining territory. You see the map? There it is. There it is, the Kharkov offensive, the Kherson offensive. Look at all the territory right there, turning blue. We're winning. Where the Russian strategy is, we're fighting the military. We're fighting the Ukraine military up until April. It was we're fighting the Ukraine military. Boris Johnson travels to Kiev and the war changes, and it's Russia fighting NATO. And so the Russian strategy has been annihilating the military, the enemy military, and that's what Surovikin said. Surovikin said when he came to command the Russian military, what did he say? This is going to be a slow grind of the opposing military. That's my goal. My goal is not gaining territory. My goal is not some lightning strike to Kiev. My goal is to grind down the enemy military. So that was the meeting, the summit, whatever you want to call it, between NATO and the European Union. They're trying to put a positive spin on things. The situation in Solidar is really bad. Solidar is going to fall. The Russians are going to take Solidar any day now. It's inevitable. They're going to take Bakhmut any day now. It's inevitable. And all of Donbass is going to crumble, in my opinion. This is where we're heading towards. I don't know when. There was talk that Solidar was going to fall today, that Ukraine was going to retreat. But once again, Zelensky, he has decided to, at the moment, he may change his mind tomorrow, but at the moment he has decided to stick it out, or at least until they can formulate some sort of media spin as to why things are going so poorly. Media is so important to them. Optics, media spin is so important to Zelensky and to the collective West and to the EU and NATO. I don't know how they're going to hide all of this. They'll figure out a way, but I don't know how they're going to hide all of these losses. I really don't. So, since we're talking about media spin, who should we discuss next? Should we talk about Macron, or should we talk about Ukraine Foreign Minister Kuleba. Let's talk about the statements from Kuleba. That'll be quick. So the Foreign Minister of Kuleba, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Kuleba, he put out a tweet yesterday, and in the tweet, he basically said that the collective West, they have done a lot for Ukraine. He has accepted the fact that they have done a lot, but they have not done enough. That is what he said. And in this instance, he is talking about weapons, more weapons, but what he really wants is he wants NATO involved. He wants the collective West in Ukraine. He wants boots on the ground because that is the only thing that could possibly rescue the Zelensky regime, the situation in Ukraine. In his tweets on Monday, the Ukraine foreign minister said, Ukraine is grateful to partners for their military aid, but we should remain honest with one another. No one has done enough. As long as Russian boots remain on Ukrainian ground, arming our country for victory is the shortest way to restoring peace and security in Europe and beyond. That is the statement from the Ukraine foreign minister. More weapons, and what happens when you have sent all those weapons and they've made no difference? Well, you start talking about troops, not mercenaries, not NATO soldiers dressed as Ukrainian soldiers fighting. Open admission that the European Union, NATO, the US are going to send troops to Ukraine. That is the natural progression of things. That's why they want to extend the war for another 6 months or another year, because they want to slow walk everyone to the eventual big ask, which is going to be, well, we've sent all our weapons, we've sent our tanks, we've sent our missiles, we've sent our air defense. We're still losing, so what do? Well, how about sending a couple thousand troops into Ukraine? That's where they want to get to. So that is the statement from Kuleba. And there is now the debate going on in the European Union about tanks and sending more weapons to Ukraine. Which tanks should we send? How many? Who's going to be the first country to send those Leopards? There's this big discussion now going on in the European Union about tanks. Tanks are the new wonder weapons that are going to make the difference, that you have to send to Ukraine. The Leopard tanks. So the UK, they announced that they're going to send Challenger 2 tanks. But, excuse me, but the Challenger 2 tanks that they're going to send are going to be symbolic. In other words, the UK is going to probably send just a couple of Challenger 2 tanks. And Poland is also going to send some Leopard 2 tanks. But they're only going to send about 2 Leopard 2 tanks. And the reason the UK has openly admitted why they're only going to send 2 or 3 or 4 Challenger tanks, a symbolic gesture. They've actually called it that, a symbolic gesture, is because the UK, what they want is they want to get the ball rolling in the European Union so that EU member states can start emptying out their tank inventories, so to speak. It's akin to playing poker, and everyone is sitting at the table, right? And so the pot is empty. No one's put in anything in the pot before the game gets started, and someone says, "Okay, I'll put in $1 to get the thing rolling," and then someone else at the table says, "I'll put in a couple dollars." And eventually, you're hoping that someone sitting at the poker table is going to say, "You know what? Here you go, $500. Boom! Now the game is going to get interesting, right? Here's 500. Let's deal the cards." That's what this is like. That's what the UK is trying to do. They're saying, "I'll put in 2 tanks," and Poland says, "You know what? I'll see your 2 tanks," and they're hoping that someone's going to come and say, "I'll see your 2 tanks, and I'll put in 3 Leopards," and they're hoping that someone somewhere, Greece or Italy or someone, Maloney, someone is going to say, "You know what? I'll see your 3 tanks with 50 Leopard 2s." Germany is flip-flopping, right? Olaf Scholz is flip-flopping. You have the vice chancellor saying that, I think it's the vice chancellor, saying that Germany is going to definitely send Leopard 2. We're going to send Leopard 2 tanks. He says, absolutely. And then you have like a spokesperson for the government, according to Reuters, a government spokesperson said, no, we're not going to be sending Leopards to Ukraine. Where is it here? From Reuters, Germany has no current plans to send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. So, Olaf Scholz, he's flip-flopping. Send Leopards, don't send Leopards. Send Leopards, don't send Leopards. What do I do? Should I send the Leopards? Yeah, no. He's just going back and forth, Oh, boy. Love Ross, hate Ross. Love Ross, hate Ross. If you can tell me in the comments down below what TV sitcom I'm referencing there, then awesome. Then great if you know which TV sitcom I'm referencing. But that's Germany right now. I mean, that's Germany. That's Olaf Scholz. They can't make up their mind. We're going to send Leopards. And then someone else in the government says, no, we're not going to send Leopards. So everyone is waiting. Who's going to be the first to send tanks? And then you have Macron sitting at the table going, I've already sent my light tanks. And everyone's like, yeah, but those aren't tanks. And Macron's like, no, those are tanks. They just have wheels. and they're not really tanks, but, they're tanks. They're light tanks. Right? So Macron, that's the way that he's gotten around this. Very smart move, actually, from Macron, to be quite honest. That was a very clever move. I have to hand it to Macron. He said, you know what? Let's just send some light tanks. Let's send 50 light tanks that we have sitting in inventory, not doing anything, that we're never going to use and are going to really do nothing in this conflict. Let's just do that so that Bidenopolis, so that Victoria Nuland gets off my back about sending real tanks to the conflict. So that's Macron. And speaking about Macron, he was speaking to journalists just yesterday, and he was asked about Russia and Ukraine and Putin, and the journalists were asking Macron his thoughts about everything that's going on, and what are his thoughts about the evil diabolical Vladimir Putin. And this is what Macron had to say. He said, quote, "When you meet him like that, he's not unpleasant. That's the paradox." Macron said that there is nothing to justify starting a war. That's what he added. So when you meet Putin, he's a pretty nice guy when you meet Putin. That's what Macron said. He's really charming. But underneath that charm is something sinister. That is what Macron is saying. Quote, basically, he launched this war to recover territories and to extend Russia's perimeter in the empire that once existed. He took a very heavy responsibility for himself, his people, obviously for the people of Ukraine, and for us all. This is how I see things. That is what Macron told the journalists when he was trying to describe the man, the myth, Vladimir Putin. That was Macron's answer. All kinds of projection, isn't it? There's a reason why the collective West goes on and on about the aspirations of Russia. Let me put it that way. The aspirations of Russia are to create the empire again, to create the Soviet Union, to create the Tsarist Empire, all of these things. There's a reason why they go on and on about this. Whenever they're asked about Putin's plan, the answer is always, well, Putin just wants to gain territory and he wants to recreate the Tsarist Empire, or he wants to recreate the Soviet Union. You know why they always say that? They always say that because it's projection. That's what they want. They're projecting their own aspirations onto Russia, because what the EU wants, what the collective West wants, what the globalists want, what the Schwabs and the Soros and the Vander Crazies and the Bidenopolises and all of these people in the globalist elite class, what they want is they want to expand their territory, go back to the NATO meeting with the European Union. What is considered the big win of the EU and NATO? Forget about Ukraine. Let's not talk about Ukraine. Our big win is our expansion. Finland, Sweden, Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, whatever is going to be left of Ukraine, if there is going to be anything left of Ukraine. That's our big win. Expansion. They're projecting their expansion, their thoughts, their desires to expand and to grow, they project them onto Russia. They're the ones that want to expand east. They're the ones that want to capture Russia. They're the ones that want Russia's wealth and resources and gas and oil. They're the ones that want to recreate empires. And they project that onto Russia and to Putin. They say that's what Putin wants. I wish there was a journalist at this press conference with Macron that just would have asked one simple question of Macron. Mr. Macron, can you comment on the statements of former President Hollande and your former partner in crime, Angela Merkel, the former German Chancellor, and their statements with regards to the Minsk agreements? What are your thoughts on what they said about the Minsk agreements? I wish there was a journalist that would have asked that of Macron. It would have been interesting to see how Macron would have answered that question. All right, so let's wrap this video up. I don't have any more to add for today. Let's do a clown world and let's talk about this video. Let's talk about this video that I'm going to put up. It is Joe Bidenopoulos, Greece's favorite son, visiting the city of El Paso on the border between Texas and Mexico. He visited the border, I believe, for the first time. He did his photo ops. He took his photos. He actually stood by the wall that Trump built. But anyway, he was at the border for the first time. And I believe for the first time, and I want you guys to see this video. He was at the Salvation Army, I think this is, and listen to what Biden had to say as he was meeting some people here in Texas, and I'll be right back.
And here we have the Salvation
So that was Joe Biden, who is now, or he claims that he was a secret service guy, a secret agent, secret service of Ukraine and Poland, or for Ukraine and Poland. Oh boy. Yeah, I guess that explains everything, doesn't it? I guess that explains Biden's obsession with with Ukraine and with Russia and all of these things. I guess if he was working in secret service or as a secret agent or something like that for Ukraine and Poland, well, I guess that explains a lot as to why we are where we are with regards to Russia and Ukraine. Anyway, that is Joe Biden for you. I am going to end the video there. theduran.locals.com. We are on Rockfin as well. And go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. You can also find my videos, the Duran's videos, and Alexander's videos on all of the platforms. Telegram, Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, and where else? Did I say Rockfin? I think I said Rockfin. I think I said Locals. We still have the Christmas tree up, which is good. Nice touch. All right, everybody. That's the video. Take care.